The Valorian freighter was dying. Its hull had been torn open in 3 places, and the cold vacuum of space was slowly pulling the air out of every room. Emergency lights flickered red and orange, casting strange shadows on the walls as the ship's power systems failed one by one. Captain, Zeltha pressed her 4-fingered hand against the wound in her side. The blood was purple and thick, and it would not stop flowing. Around her, the bodies of her crew lay scattered across the bridge. Some were dead. Others were dying. The Krath raiders had come fast and without mercy, as they always did. They had taken what they wanted from the cargo hold and left the freighter to drift. The distress beacon had been sending its signal for 6 hours now. Zeltha knew it was pointless. This sector of space was empty and forgotten. No patrol ships came here. No rescue vessels watched these routes. The Valorians were a small species with no powerful friends and no military to speak of. When trouble found them, they simply died. She closed her large, dark eyes and waited for the end dot far across the sector. The U steadfast moved through the darkness on a routine mapping mission. It was a medium-class patrol ship, not particularly large or impressive. Its crew of 62 men and women had been in space for 3 months, charting new routes through unexplored territory. The work was boring, but necessary. Commander Daniel Hayes sat in his captain's chair, reading through reports on his datapad. He was a tall man in his early 40s, with gray starting to show at his temples and deep lines around his eyes from years of squinting at screens. He had joined the United Earth Navy at 18 and had never wanted to do anything else. His first officer, Lieutenant Commander Karen Brooks, stood at the sensor station nearby. She was younger than Hayes, with short brown hair and a serious face that rarely smiled. She was good at her job and Hayes trusted her completely. "Sir," she said suddenly, her voice sharp with surprise. "I am picking up a distress signal." Hayes looked up from his reports. "Out here?" "Show me." The main screen changed to display a map of their current position. A small red dot blinked about 4 hours away at standard speed. "The signal is Valorian," Karen said. "A freighter, from what I can tell. The message says they were attacked by Krath raiders. They have hull breaches and a losing atmosphere." Hayes frowned. The Krath were bad news. They were a predatory species that had built an empire by conquering and enslaving weaker races. They raided shipping lanes, took slaves, and killed anyone who resisted. Most species in this part of the galaxy simply tried to avoid them. "How long have they been broadcasting?" Hayes asked. 6 hours, sir." 6 hours. That was a long time for a ship with hull breaches. There might not be anyone left alive. Karen seemed to read his thoughts. "Sir, this is not our sector. We have no treaty with the Valorians. Protocol says we should report the signal and continue our mission." She was right. The regulations were clear. Earth's patrol ships were not supposed to engage in rescue operations outside their designated areas without direct orders. The paperwork alone would take months. Hayes stood up from his chair and walked closer to the screen. He stared at the blinking red dot for a long moment. How many crew on a Valorian freighter of that class? He asked. Karen checked a console. Standard complement is between 20 and 30. 20 or 30 people, dying alone in the dark because no one was coming to help them. Hayes thought about what that must feel like. He thought about the fear and the cold and the slow realization that hope was gone. "Change course," he said. "Maximum speed." Karen's eyes widened. "Sir, the regulations. I know what the regulations say, Karen." Hayes turned to face her. "And I know there are people dying out there. We can reach them in time. We have the medical supplies and the repair equipment. We can help. The Krath might still be in the area. Then we will deal with them if we have to." Hayes returned to his chair. "I will take full responsibility. Note my decision in the log." But we are going. Karen hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. Yes, sir. The Steadfast turned and accelerated into the void. When they arrived at the coordinates, the scene was worse than Hayes had expected. The Valorian freighter looked like it had been torn apart by giant hands. Debris floated around it in a slowly expanding cloud. 3 sections of the hull were completely open to space. Life signs? Hayes asked. The sensor officer, a young man named Chris Palmer, worked his console frantically. I am reading 7 life signs, sir. Very weak. They are all concentrated on the bridge. 7 survivors out of a crew of 24. Hayes felt his jaw tighten. Karen, you have the bridge. I am leading the rescue team myself. 30 minutes later, Hayes stood on the bridge of the dying freighter. The emergency lights were almost dead now, and his team had to use flashlights to see. The air was thin and cold, barely breathable even with their portable oxygen supplies. They found Captain Zeltha slumped against her command chair, surrounded by the bodies of her crew. Her eyes were closed, and her purple blood had pooled on the floor beneath her. For a terrible moment, Hayes thought she was dead. Then her eyes opened. She looked up at him with confusion and something that might have been fear. Hayes knew that humans and Valorians had never made formal contact before. She probably had no idea what he was. Easy, he said softly, kneeling beside her. We picked up your distress signal. We are here to help. Help? Her voice was weak and rough. Why? It was a strange question. Hayes did not understand it at first. Because you needed it, he said simply. The rescue took 14 hours. Hayes and his crew worked without rest, stabilizing the wounded, patching the worst hull breaches, and transferring emergency supplies. The steadfast medical officer, Dr. Amy Sullivan, saved 3 lives that night through skill and determination. When it was over, the Valorian freighter was stable enough to limp home on its own. Captain Zeltha, her wounds treated and her strength slowly returning, stood with Hayes in the airlock between their 2 ships. I do not understand, she said. We have nothing to offer you. We cannot pay you. We have no alliance with your people. Why did you come? Hayes looked at her for a long moment. In his mind, the answer was obvious. It was not complicated at all. You were dying, he said. We could help. That is all there is to it. Zeltha stared at him with her large, dark eyes. In all her years of traveling the stars, she had never encountered a species like this. Every other race she knew operated on calculation and self-interest. Kindness between strangers was not something that existed in her understanding of the universe. I will not forget this, she said quietly. Hayes smiled and shook her hand. Take care of yourself, Captain. Then he returned to his ship and continued his mission, thinking nothing more of it. It had been the right thing to do. That was enough, but Zeltha remembered. Her people remembered. And in the dark corners of the galaxy, a debt was recorded that would one day be repaid in ways no one could imagine. 18 months passed after the rescue of the Valorian freighter. In that time, humanity continued its slow expansion into the Orion Spur, building new colonies and establishing trade routes with friendly species. The encounter with the Valorians was recorded in official logs and then mostly forgotten. It had been a small moment in the vast movement of human civilization across the stars. New Horizon was one of humanity's proudest achievements. The planet was beautiful, with blue oceans and green continents and air so clean it tasted sweet. 12 million people lived there, in cities and towns and farms spread across 3 major landmasses. Families had been born there. Children had grown up knowing no other home. Commander Lisa Garrett commanded the small defensive fleet assigned to protect the colony. She had 8 ships under her command, none of them particularly powerful. New Horizon was far from any major conflict zone. and Earth's military planners had decided it did not need heavy protection. That decision would cost millions of lives. The Krath Dominion had been watching humanity for some time. They were patient predators who studied their prey before striking. They saw that humans were expanding quickly, claiming worlds and resources that the Krath considered rightfully theirs. They saw that human ships sometimes helped weaker species, which confused and annoyed them. Most importantly, they saw that New Horizon was poorly defended and rich with everything the Krath desired. The attack came without any warning. Lisa was drinking coffee in her quarters when the alarm started screaming. She ran to the bridge of her flagship, the Use Defiance, and felt her heart stop when she saw the sensor readings. 300 warships. 300 Krath vessels dropping out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation around the planet. It was the largest fleet she had ever seen. All ships, battle stations, she ordered, keeping her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. Launch all fighters. Get me a line to the colony governor. Governor Samuel Price appeared on her screen moments later. He was an older man with a kind face that now looked pale with fear. Commander, what is happening? Krath Invasion Fleet Governor. 300 ships. I need you to begin immediate evacuation of all civilians. Use every ship you have. Get as many people off the planet as possible. 300? His voice cracked. You only have 8 ships. Lisa looked at the tactical display. The Krath fleet was moving toward them slowly, confidently. They knew they had overwhelming force. They were in no hurry. I know, she said. I will buy you as much time as I can. She cut the connection and turned to her crew. They were young, most of them. They had joined the Navy expecting to explore and protect, not to die in a hopeless battle against impossible odds. She could see the fear in their eyes, but she could also see determination. You all know what we are facing, Lisa said. You all know the math. But down on that planet, there are 12 million people who need time to escape. Every minute we give them is another life saved. That is what we are fighting for today. No one spoke. No one needed to. All ships, attack formation. Target their troop transports. Make them pay for every inch. The battle began. For 3 days, Lisa and her 8 ships fought against the Krath Armada. They used every trick, every tactic, every desperate maneuver they could think of. They hid in the planet's asteroid belt and launched ambushes. They targeted supply ships and troop carriers. They made the Krath bleed, but the numbers were too great. On the first day, Lisa lost 2 ships. On the second day, she lost 2 more. By the third day, she was down to her last 4 vessels. All of them damaged and running low on ammunition. On the ground. The situation was even worse. Colonel Patrick Dunn commanded the 40,000 soldiers defending New Horizon. He was a stocky man in his 50s who had fought in 3 wars and had never lost a battle. But he had also never faced anything like this. The Krath landed their troops on all 3 continents at once. Hundreds of thousands of warriors poured out of their transports, supported by heavy armor and air power. Patrick spread his forces as thin as he dared, focusing on protecting the evacuation corridors that led to the spaceports. Hold the line, he told his soldiers again and again. Every hour we hold, another 100,000 civilians get off this planet. The fighting was brutal and close. The Krath were larger than humans, stronger and harder to kill. They showed no mercy and expected none. Patrick watched his soldiers die by the hundreds, by the thousands, fighting in streets and buildings and open fields. His wife, Margaret, was helping coordinate civilian evacuations in the capital city. He had not seen her in 2 days. He did not know if she was alive or dead. He pushed that thought away and focused on the battle. The days turned into a week. Then 2 weeks. Lisa Garrett died on the 12th day. Her ship, The Defiance was finally overwhelmed by enemy fire. She ordered her crew to abandon ship, then stayed at her post, firing weapons until the reactor went critical. She took 4 craft destroyers with her when she exploded. Patrick Dunn lasted until the 14th day. He was leading a counterattack to keep a spaceport open when a craft energy blast caught him in the chest. He died in the arms of his aide, a young lieutenant named Rachel Torres, who had been with him since the beginning. "Did we get them out?" Patrick asked with his last breath. Rachel looked at the transports lifting off in the distance, carrying thousands of civilians to safety. "Yes, sir. We got them out." Patrick smiled and closed his eyes. When the battle finally ended, the numbers told a terrible story. 7 million humans had escaped the planet. 5 million had not. Of those 5 million, 2 million were captured by the Krath and taken as slaves. 3 million died in the fighting or were executed after the Krath took control. The Krath raised their flag over the ruins of New Horizons' capital city. They began stripping the planet of resources and processing their new slaves for transport back to their empire. It was, from their perspective, a successful operation. They had gained a valuable world and a large workforce. They did not understand what they had done. Across the galaxy, the news of New Horizons spread like fire. Other species watched the reports with grim resignation. This was how the universe worked. The strong took from the weak. The Krath had been doing this for 400 years. It was simply the natural order. But on Earth, something different was happening. There was no panic in the streets. There were no riots or protests demanding surrender. Instead, a strange silence fell over the human homeworld. People gathered in their homes and watched the footage from New Horizon. They saw the bodies of their fellow humans. They saw the children being led away in chains, and something cold and hard settled into their hearts. The Krath had made a mistake. They had studied human kindness and mistaken it for weakness. They had seen humans help strangers and assumed this meant humans would not fight. They could not have been more wrong. In the halls of power, in military bases, in factories and shipyards, humanity began to move with a single purpose. No speeches were needed. No propaganda was necessary. Every human understood, in their bones, what had to happen next. The Krath had killed their children. Now the Krath would learn what that meant. Admiral Catherine Price stood before the United Earth Council in the Great Hall of the planetary government. She was a woman in her early 60s, with silver hair cut short and eyes that had seen more battles than she cared to remember. Behind her, a massive screen displayed images from New Horizon. The burning cities, the mass graves, the long lines of humans being marched into Krath slave ships. The council members sat in silence. Some had tears on their faces. Others had expressions of stone. All of them were waiting to hear what Catherine would say. She did not waste time with pleasantries. "The Krath Dominion has ruled this region of space for 400 years, she began. They have conquered 32 species. They have enslaved billions of sentient beings. They have built their empire on blood and cruelty, and they have done it because no one has ever stopped them." She paused and looked around the room. "That ends now." A murmur went through the council. One of the senior members, an older man named Gregory Walsh, raised his hand. "Admiral, we all share your anger. But the Krath have 300 worlds. They have thousands of warships. Their military has been fighting and winning for centuries. How do you propose we defeat them?" Catherine had been waiting for this question. "We do not defeat them," she said. "We erase them." The room went very quiet. "I am not talking about a war of territory or resources. I'm not talking about negotiation or containment. The Krath took 2 million of our people as slaves. They murdered 3 million more. They destroyed one of our worlds and thought we would accept it, the way every other species has accepted their cruelty. Her voice grew harder. We will not accept it. We will not negotiate. We will not stop until the Krath Dominion is nothing but a memory. Every ship, every base, every world that supports their war machine, all of it. Gregory leaned forward. That would require total mobilization. Every resource we have, yes. It would take years, perhaps decades. I do not care if it takes a century, Catherine said. We will not rest until this is done. The vote was unanimous. For the first time in human history, the entire species united behind a single purpose. Total war against the Krath Dominion. Within weeks, the transformation began. The shipyards of Luna, which had been building colony vessels and cargo ships, switched entirely to warship production. New designs were rushed from concept to construction in months instead of years. Engineers worked double shifts, then triple shifts. Robots built hulls around the clock, while humans fine-tuned weapon systems and engines. On Mars, the research facilities turned their attention to weapons development. Scientists who had been studying peaceful applications of physics suddenly found themselves designing more efficient ways to kill. They did not complain. Many of them had family on New Horizon in the asteroid belt. Mining operations quadrupled their output. Every gram of metal, every drop of fuel went toward the war effort. Miners who had never thought about the military suddenly understood that their work was keeping soldiers alive. On Earth itself, recruitment centers were overwhelmed. The military had expected to implement conscription, forcing citizens to serve whether they wanted to or not. It was not necessary. Volunteers came by the millions. Old soldiers who had retired decades ago showed up asking for their uniforms back. Young people who had been planning careers in art or science or business walked into recruitment offices instead. The anger was not hot and wild. It was cold and patient and absolute. But humanity did not prepare alone. On the Valorian homeworld, far across the galaxy, Captain Zeltha had risen to become an elder of the High Council. She was old now, her scales faded and her movements slow. But her mind was still sharp, and her memory was perfect. She remembered the human ship that had come out of nowhere to save her dying crew. She remembered Commander Daniel Hayes kneeling beside her, telling her that they had come because she needed help. She had spent 18 months thinking about that moment, trying to understand what kind of species would do such a thing. When news of New Horizon reached the Valorian Council, Zeltha called an emergency session. "You have all seen the reports," she said to her fellow elders. "The Krath have attacked humanity. They have killed millions and taken millions more as slaves." One of the younger council members, a male named Torvin, made a dismissive gesture. "This is unfortunate, but it is not our concern. The Krath have been doing this for centuries. We cannot help, cannot?" Zeltha's voice was sharp. "Or will not. What could we possibly do? We have no military, no fleet. The Krath would destroy us if we interfered." Zeltha stood slowly, her joints aching with age. 80 months ago, I was dying on a broken ship in empty space. My crew was dead around me. No help was coming. And then a human vessel appeared. They risked their lives to save us, strangers they had never met and would never see again. When I asked them why, their commander said something I will never forget. She looked around the room. He said we needed help, as if that was the only reason anyone would ever need. The council was silent. The humans showed us kindness when we were nothing to them. Now they are in their darkest hour. What are we, if we do not answer? Torvin shifted uncomfortably. What can we offer? We have no weapons, no soldiers. We have something better, Zeltha said. We have information. The Valorians were traders and merchants. They traveled to every corner of the galaxy, buying and selling goods. For centuries, they had been watching the Krath, learning their patrol routes and supply lines, mapping their military installations, counting their ships. They had gathered this information out of fear, hoping to avoid the predators. Now that information had a different purpose. "We will give the humans everything we know," Zeltha declared. "Every secret, every weakness, every route and schedule. We will open our trade networks to them. We will convince our partners to close their ports to Krath vessels. We will do everything in our small power to help them win." The vote was not unanimous, but it passed. The Valorians would repay their debt. Within days, encrypted data packages began arriving at Earth's military headquarters. Admiral Price studied the information with growing amazement. The Valorians had given them a complete picture of the Krath Dominion, better than anything human intelligence had ever assembled. "Who are these people?" asked her aide, Commander Stephen Blake, as he scrolled through the data. "Friends," Catherine said simply. "Friends who remember a kindness." The preparations continued for 6 months. Human factories produced over 2,000 warships. Human soldiers trained for combat against Krath warriors. Human scientists developed new weapons and defenses. And all the while, the cold anger grew stronger that the Krath believed that humans had accepted their defeat at New Horizon. They continued their occupation of the planet, continued working their slaves, continued their normal operations. They had no idea what was coming. On the anniversary of New Horizon's fall, Admiral Catherine Price stood on the bridge of her flagship, the UES Retribution. Around her, 2,000 warships waited for her orders. Behind them, a support fleet of supply vessels and troop transports stretched across the stars. She opened a channel to the fleet. "Today, we remember what was taken from us. Today, we honor the 5 million who died and the 2 million who suffer in chains. Today, we begin the work of justice." She paused. "There will be no negotiations, no truces, no mercy for those who showed none to our people. We will not stop until the job is done." She straightened in her chair. "All ships engage faster than light drives. Take us to war." 2,000 human warships vanished into the void, carrying with them the fury of an entire species. The reckoning had begun. The Krath shipyards at Velkoth were the largest military production facility in the Dominion. 18 massive orbital platforms circled a barren moon, building warships day and night. At any given time, nearly 100 vessels were docked there, either under construction or being repaired after. Battles. Commander Stephen Blake led the assault force that arrived without warning. 300 human warships dropped out of faster than light. Travel in perfect formation, already firing. The Krath defenders had no time to react. Their patrol ships were destroyed in the first 30 seconds. Their defense platforms lasted perhaps a minute longer. Stephen stood on the bridge of his ship, the UES Thunder, watching the destruction unfold on his tactical display. "Target the docked vessels first," he ordered. "Nothing leaves this system." The human ships moved with terrible precision. They had trained for 6 months for exactly this kind of operation. Every captain knew their role. Every gunner knew their targets. The Krath ships that tried to flee were cut down. The ships that tried to fight were overwhelmed. In less than 2 hours, the greatest shipyard in the Krath Dominion was reduced to burning wreckage. Stephen surveyed the destruction with grim satisfaction. 57 Krath warships destroyed. 18 construction platforms eliminated. An entire generation of Krath military production erased in a single morning. "Signal Admiral Price," he said. "Velkoth is secure. Moving to secondary targets." This was only the beginning. Across Krath space, similar attacks were happening simultaneously. Human fleets struck at supply depots and fuel stations. They hit communication relays and sensor networks. They targeted every piece of military infrastructure the Valorian intelligence had identified. The Krath High Command received reports of attacks from dozens of locations at once. They could not understand what was happening. No enemy had ever struck them like this before. Previous wars had been slow and careful, with clear front lines and predictable movements. The humans fought differently. They struck everywhere at once, then vanished before reinforcements could arrive. They did not try to hold territory. They simply destroyed everything of military value and moved on. Supreme Overlord Verthan stood in his command center on Krath Prime, watching his empire bleed. Where are they getting their information? He demanded. How do they know where to strike? No one could answer him. While the main fleet tore through Krath military installations, Lieutenant Commander Nicole Adams led a different kind of operation. Her task force of 50 ships and 20,000 ground troops had a single mission: liberation. The first target was a slave processing facility on a world called Grethinor. 300,000 beings from various species were held there, waiting to be sorted and shipped to labor camps throughout the Empire. Among them were over 40,000 humans taken from New Horizon. Nicole's ships destroyed the orbital defenses in minutes. Her troops landed in force, overwhelming the Krath guards before they could organize resistance. Within 6 hours, the facility was secure. She walked through the holding pens herself, looking at the faces of the freed slaves. Many of them could not believe what was happening. They had been told that no one would ever come for them. They had been told that resistance was pointless and hope was foolish. A human woman grabbed Nicole's arm as she passed. Her clothes were ragged and her face was thin from hunger, but her eyes were fierce. "Are you really here?" she asked. "Is this real?" Nicole took the woman's hands in her own. "It is real. We are taking you home." The woman began to cry. So did dozens of others around her. "We never forgot you," Nicole said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We never stopped looking. And we are not leaving anyone behind." Over the following weeks, Nicole's task force liberated 17 slave worlds. They freed not just the humans captured at New Horizon, but every other species the Krath had enslaved. Millions of beings who had given up hope suddenly found themselves free. The freed slaves told their stories to anyone who would listen. They told other species about the humans who had come for them, who had fought through Krath defenses and risked their lives to set strangers free. The stories spread across the galaxy like ripples in water. Meanwhile, the Valorians continued their quiet work. Zeltha coordinated her people's efforts from her council chamber, receiving reports and sending instructions through encrypted channels. Valorian merchant ships carried supplies along routes that no human navigator knew. Valorian diplomats met with neutral powers, warning them that supporting the Krath would have consequences. One by one, the neutral species closed their ports to Krath vessels. Trade agreements were canceled. Fuel contracts were broken. The Krath found themselves increasingly isolated, unable to get the resources they needed to sustain their war effort. It was not a dramatic contribution. The Valorians had no great fleet to send, no mighty army to deploy. But every supply run completed, every diplomatic victory won. Every piece of intelligence delivered made the human advance a little easier. Back on Krath Prime, Supreme Overlord Verthan finally understood the true nature of his enemy. He had studied humans before the invasion of New Horizon. He had seen their ships help weaker species. He had watched them extend kindness to strangers. He had concluded that they were soft, that their compassion made them weak. Now he saw how wrong he had been. The same species that stopped to rescue dying freighters was now systematically dismantling his empire. The same people who helped strangers for no reward were killing his soldiers with cold efficiency. There was no contradiction, he realized. It was all part of the same pattern. Humans cared deeply about others. That was their defining trait. And when something they cared about was threatened, when their people were hurt, that caring transformed into something terrifying. The Krath had hurt them. They had killed their children and enslaved their families. And now the humans were making them pay. Verthan called his military commanders to a council of war. His generals and admirals stood around a holographic map of the Dominion, watching the red markers of human fleets push deeper into their territory. "We must negotiate," Verthan said. "We must offer them terms. Return their slaves. Abandon New Horizon. Pay reparations. Whatever they want." One of his senior commanders, a scarred veteran named Cawthron, shook his head. "They will not negotiate. We have sent 17 requests for talks. They have ignored everyone. Then we must surrender unconditionally." The room went silent. In 400 years of Krath history, no Supreme Overlord had ever spoken those words. "They will not accept," Cawthron said quietly. "Supreme Overlord, I have studied their communications. I have analyzed their tactics. They are not fighting for territory or resources or political advantage. They are fighting to destroy us." Verthan stared at the map. The human fleets were converging now, driving toward the heart of his empire, toward Krath Prime itself. "Can we stop them?" Cawthron was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke the truth. "No." In orbit around a liberated world, Admiral Catherine Price received reports from across the theater of operations. The Krath military was collapsing. Their supply lines were cut. Their reinforcements could not reach the front. Their morale was shattered. Victory was inevitable now. It was only a matter of time. Her aide, Commander Blake, approached with a datapad. "Admiral, we have received another request for negotiations from the Krath leadership." Catherine did not look up from her tactical display. "Same answer as before. We do not negotiate with slavers. They are offering unconditional surrender." Now she looked up. Her eyes were cold and hard. "Tell them they can surrender when we arrive at their homeworld. Not before." Blake hesitated. "Admiral, if we accept surrender now, we could end the war. Save lives on both sides." Catherine turned to face him fully. When she spoke, her voice was soft but utterly certain. "Commander, they took 2 million of our people as slaves. They murdered 3 million more. Children, families, innocents who had never done them any harm." She paused. "We will not give them an easy end. We will not let them keep their pride or their dignity or their illusions. We will go to their homeworld, and we will make them watch as everything they built falls apart around them. And then, only then, will we accept their surrender." She turned back to the display. "Signal the fleet. Continue the advance." The storm moved on, unstoppable and absolute. The war lasted 14 months, from the first shot to the final surrender. In that time, the Krath Dominion was reduced from the greatest power in its region of space to a broken, occupied territory under human control. 26 Krath worlds fell to human forces. Their fleet of thousands of warships was destroyed or captured. Their military leadership was either dead or in chains. Their economy was shattered, their infrastructure demolished, their ability to wage war eliminated entirely. Admiral Catherine Price accepted the formal surrender in the ruins of the Krath capital city. Supreme Overlord Vathan stood before her, his ceremonial robes dirty and torn, his proud bearing finally broken. Around them, human soldiers watched in silence. The ceremony was broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. Billions of beings watched as the greatest predator empire in their region of space was brought to its knees. "By the authority vested in me by the United Earth Council," Catherine said, "I accept the unconditional surrender of the Krath Dominion. Your military forces will be disbanded. Your leadership will face trial for crimes against sentient life. Your worlds will remain under occupation until such time as we determine you no longer pose a threat to peace." Vertham bowed his head. "I accept these terms. One more thing." Catherine's voice hardened. "You will release every slave in your possession. Every being of every species that you have taken against their will. Immediately. It is already being done." Catherine nodded. "Then we are finished here." She turned and walked away. Behind her, Krath soldiers laid down their weapons and human troops moved to secure the planet. 400 years of conquest and cruelty ended not with a great battle, but with a quiet ceremony in a ruined city that the liberation of the slaves took weeks. Millions of beings from dozens of species were freed from labor camps and processing facilities across former Krath space. Human medical teams treated their injuries. Human supply ships brought food and clothing. Human vessels carried them back to their homeworlds. Among the freed were the survivors from New Horizon. Of the 2 million humans taken as slaves, just over 1.5 million had survived captivity. They were thin and scarred and traumatized, but they were alive. Nicole Adams, now promoted to captain for her role in the liberation operations, personally oversaw the return of the New Horizon survivors to Earth. She watched as the transport ships landed, as families who had been separated for over a year were reunited. A little boy, perhaps 7 years old, ran across the landing field and threw himself into the arms of a crying woman. Nicole learned later that the boy had been separated from his mother on the first day of the invasion. They had both believed the other was dead. Scenes like this played out thousands of times across the fleet. Each one reminded Nicole why they had fought. The trials began 3 months after the surrender. The Krath leadership, including Supreme Overlord Vothan and his senior commanders, were charged with crimes against sentient life. The evidence was overwhelming. The verdict was never in doubt. Rathan and 17 other Krath leaders were found guilty and executed. The galaxy watched as the architects of centuries of cruelty finally faced justice. But even as the trials concluded, life was already returning to normal. Wormel. The human war machine wound down. Factories returned to civilian production. Soldiers went home to their families. The great fleet that had destroyed an empire was gradually reduced to peacetime levels. New Horizon was reclaimed. Human settlers began returning to rebuild what had been lost. It would take decades to restore the planet to what it had been. But the work had begun, 6 months after the war ended. A delegation from the Valorian High Council arrived on Earth. The diplomatic visit had been requested through official channels, but its true purpose was more personal. Captain Zelfa, now very old and moving with difficulty, led the delegation. She walked slowly through the halls of the United Earth Council, supported by younger members of her species. The council chamber was full when she entered. Representatives from across humanity had gathered to receive the Valorian guests. Admiral Catherine Price stood with her senior officers. Politicians and diplomats filled the viewing galleries, and standing near the front, wearing an admiral's uniform now decorated with medals for his service in the war, was Daniel Hayes. Zelfa saw him immediately. She had seen images of him over the years, had followed his career from a distance. But this was the first time they had been in the same room since that day on her dying freighter, when he had knelt beside her and told her that he had come because she needed help. She walked toward him, ignoring the protocol that said she should address the council first. The other Valorians followed uncertainly. Daniel watched her approach. He had read the intelligence reports about Valorian contributions to the war. He had seen the data packages they had sent, the supply routes they had opened, the diplomatic pressure they had applied. He understood now what the Valorians had done, and why Zell '"THA" stopped in front of him. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. "Commander Hayes," she said finally, Or Admiral Hayes, I suppose I should say now. Captain Zeltha. He smiled. It has been a while. Nearly 3 years. She tilted her head in the Valorian expression of respect. I told you that I would not forget what you did for me and my crew. I hope I have proven that. Daniel shook his head. You did not owe us anything. We helped you because you needed help. We would have done it regardless of whether you could ever repay us. I know, Zeltha said. That is what makes your species so remarkable. She turned to address the full council, raising her voice so everyone could hear. My people have learned something during these past 2 years. We have learned that humanity does not forgive a kindness. They carry it with them always, as a debt that can never be fully repaid. And they extend that kindness to others, again and again, expecting nothing in return. She paused. But I have also learned something else. Something that the Krath learned too late. The room was utterly silent. The same species that will cross the void to save strangers will burn empires to ash to protect their children. The same people who show mercy to the weak will show no mercy to those who threaten what they love. There is no contradiction in this. It is simply what humans are. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the humans who had changed the galaxy. You are capable of great kindness and great destruction. You help those who cannot help themselves, and you punish those who prey upon the innocent. You remember your friends, and you do not forget your enemies. A gaze returned to Daniel. My people are honored to call you friends, and we will remember the lesson you have taught the galaxy. Those who show humanity kindness will receive kindness in return, multiplied beyond measure. And those who show humanity cruelty. She did not need to finish the sentence. Everyone knew how it ended. The Krath had learned. The galaxy had learned. And in the centuries that followed, the lesson would be passed down through countless species and civilizations. Humanity did not forgive a kindness. They repaid it with overwhelming generosity, with friendship that lasted through generations, with loyalty that never wavered. And they did not forgive cruelty either. They repaid that with overwhelming force, with justice that could not be escaped, with consequences that could not be avoided. It was not complicated. It was simply who they were. In the years that followed, many species would look up at the stars and wonder what the humans were doing out there. Some would fear them. Some would admire them. Some would seek their friendship, knowing that a friend to humanity was a friend forever. And some would learn, as the Krath had learned, that there were lines that should never be crossed on Earth. Daniel Hayes retired from the Navy and spent his remaining years teaching at the Academy, training the next generation of officers. He never thought of himself as a hero. He never understood why people made such a fuss about what he had done. He had simply helped people who needed help. That was all. But Zeltha understood. The galaxy understood. And the story of the human ship that had stopped to save a dying freighter, and the war that followed years later, became a legend told across 1,000 worlds. It was a simple lesson. Really, be kind to humans, and they will be kind to you forever. Hurt them, and they will destroy everything you have ever built. Choose wisely.